Welcome back, Board Game Crusaders. Today we're going to be going over Warhammer Disc Wars. This one's going to be a little bit tricky for me because it plays on a 3-foot by 3-foot area. So I'm going to try my best to do this one well. I hope it works and I hope you enjoy it. This video is already long enough without need of an extensive components overview, so I'm just going to cover a couple of things briefly here that I don't really touch on in the video as a whole. Starting with this. This is the empowerment token. Anytime you play an ability that allows you to empower a specific unit, you place this token on them until the empowerment is resolved. What this token represents is that the disc has +1 to that stat, +1 to that stat, and +1 to that stat while the empowerment's in play. Next are these, which come in play with abilities that you play on the cards. Typically the card will say to use them. In this example it says mark with a shield, so just follow those as needed. I'm not going to touch on those anymore. And this is the range marker. I'm going to cover this a lot through the video, but I just wanted to give you the breakdown right here because it's kind of crucial. On this, whenever you're measuring any kind of range or setting up the board or lots of different scenarios where you use this, this red portion is indicating short range. The yellow portion is indicating medium range, and the yellow portion is the long range indicator. You'll also notice the starburst that is in the center of each of these in case you have to measure in halves. When building your army in a two-player game, you're going to want to decide if you're playing good guys or bad guys. In a two-player game, you can use any combination of the gold or blue discs, which represent the good guy colors, and the red and green represent the bad guy colors. So if you're playing the good guys, you can use these colors, the bad guys use these colors. In a 4-player game, you all just pick your color and you build accordingly. You're also going to see that there are different size discs. There's the large, there's the medium, there's the small. When you're building your army, each regiment, which I'll help define regiment in a minute, but each regiment can only have one of the large discs with a specific name, sharing that name, 2 of the medium discs sharing a specific name, and 3 of the small discs sharing a specific name. Also, for every large or medium disc in your regiment, you must have a small disc in that regiment for each one. So you can't just build an overpowered regiment full of large or large medium. You have to have the small ones in there to kind of buffer it out. A regiment is controlled by a hero. I may refer to the hero as leader throughout this video. If I do, you just know that I'm talking about the hero. But the hero is indicated by the word hero there, first of all. This crown, which is unique to the heroes, and this number will typically be in white instead of black for the heroes. So when you're building a regiment, you have to follow the rules that I've already laid out with the disc sizes and the colors, with one additional rule to the colors. A gold bordered hero cannot contain a blue bordered troop. So if you are doing a gold and blue, you'll have to have golden heroes with golden troops and blue heroes with blue troops. Now when you're playing the game, you can play them out however you want. They don't have to stay together or anything, but when you're building your army, that's an important rule, as with the other rules I'm outlining. First, this number in the crown, that's going to represent how many of the command cards you get for that hero. Now the command cards don't really have two particular sets of, any particular set of rules. The only thing really is that you can't have more than one card with the same name. And so this hero, for instance, gives you 2 of those. You get to add to your overall hand size or your overall deck, and you can pick that freely based on your strategy and what you want to accomplish in the game, or how you think you'll use your army. Next is this number here, the white 34, just says how many points this army can hold. You'll just look at this number on the other discs to see how many points that guy's worth, This guy counts for 7 points and would be 7 away from my 34 when building my army here. Now when you're playing the game, you'll also each decide how many regiments you're going to use. You'll use the same number of regiments. So if you're playing with 2 regiments, each player chooses a hero and fills out their army accordingly. I would never recommend using less than 2 regiments, except maybe on your first playthrough. Beyond that, any lower than 2 regiments is kind of a dull, fast game, I think. Maybe good for learning though, so maybe try that your first time, but never again. Let's see. A couple other things you want to look at. This flag means you can only have one of that named unit in your army, your overall army. So no other regiment can contain a guy with that name. However, this medal indicates that that regiment can only have one of the Sun Dragon, but your other regiment could contain another Sun Dragon if you wanted to, because it's not the flag, it's the medal. But again, there's that other rule where you can only have one big token of the same name in any given regiment anyway, which is probably why this has that. But some of the smaller tokens I've noticed have those medals and flags as well that aren't heroes, because you can also only have one hero of the same name in your overall army as well. So that is that on building your army. Now if that's too complicated or you just want to jump into the game, you can refer to the bottom of page 17. The bottom of page 17 shows you some pre-constructed regiments, and you can just again decide how many regiments you want to use. Your opponent will use the same number, and you each just pick some of the pre-constructed regiments and go at it from there. Setup's pretty easy. Just going to be hard for me to capture again on a 3 foot by 3 foot area, but I'm going to kind of show you with my jittery camera. So essentially you take these corners and you measure a 3 foot by 3 foot area. As fate would have it, this range marker is a 1 foot measure. So essentially you'll start at one area, you'll place your first corner next to it, and then you'll just turn this end over end. So there's 1 foot, 2 foot, and 3 foot. Then you place another one of these. And then you do the same thing going that way, and then measuring this one against that one, until you've made a square with all of these bad boys. Or, I guess, if you're lazy like me, you can go buy yourself a piece of felt, which is good because it helps the discs turn over better, and it's just better for playing this game. Cut it to a 3 foot by 3 foot area, and you've got your mat right there when you just lay it out. So much easier. Then you take your d6, you roll your d6. You add the result to any unused recruitment points. That determines initiative order. The person with the highest value gets the big axe, which indicates they are the first player and they have the best initiative. Way to go. Nothing to prove here, right? Then the next highest gets this one, and I guess in a 2-player game you don't need it. You really only just need this one, but if you're playing a 3-player game or 4-player game, the next highest gets this one, and then the next highest gets this one, and the last person gets this one. Which may not seem like a big deal, because when you're playing the game it's not. But when you're setting up, having this bad boy in a 4-player game, or having the 3 in a 3-player game, or the 2 in a 2-player game, is going to be so cool. Kind of helps level the playing field, as it were. So once you have determined initiative in reverse initiative order, so I'm just going to lay these out as a visual demonstration for those that don't know what reverse initiative order is. So this is the highest initiative, this is the lowest initiative. Reverse initiative order means you start at the lowest and work your way up. That's reverse initiative order. So in reverse initiative order, the lowest player gets to mix these all up, these scenario cards and objective cards, and they get to pick the top 2 after they're mixed up. Look at those, and pay complete attention to the top with the scenarios, completely ignoring the objectives. These scenario that this person chooses will be the scenario that impacts everybody throughout the game. And so let's just say he chooses charge. Each disc gains 1 movement through the duration of the game, and that impacts everybody. Again, this is ignored for this pick, and that's placed next to the board for reference. This is turned over, shuffled back in, and then every player will be getting 1 of these. As you can see, there's 4 left, so for a 4-player game, everyone gets 1. We're just going to say for a 2-player game, you deal out 2 of those. Each player secretly looks at it, ignoring the top this time, because we're already using charge as a group, but the objective, that is yours and yours alone, and you keep it secret so no one else knows what you're trying to do, so they don't thwart you in your evil plan or your heroic plan, depending on who you're playing. Next, we get to place the deployment cards. If you will remember way back when we were building our armies, we decided how many regiments we were going to use, and each player got to choose that many heroes and build that many regiments. Well, that comes into play again here, because depending on how many regiments you're using will depend on how many of these you're using. You're going to randomize them, big surprise there, and then deal them face up, 1 for each regiment in play per player. So if you decided you were going to use 2 regiments and you're playing a 2-player game, you deal 4 of these out. Now if you were using a 3-player game with 2 regiments, you just add 2, and so on. Now if you were playing a 3-regiment game with 2 players, you do 6. I think everyone can follow the math there, I hope. If not, this probably isn't the good game for you. Sorry. So let's say a 2-player 2-regiment turn, or game. We're going to deal out 4 of these. And again, in reverse initiative order, you get to pick these out. So the lowest player picks first, then it goes around the table, everybody picking 1, until it comes back around to the lowest player who picks their second, and so on and so forth. And that just continues till they're all gone. Once they're all gone, you're going to place them along the edge of the map. Now, you can place them in a 2-player game anywhere you want along the edge of the map on your side. If you place them together, then the special abilities referenced count for that whole big area moving forward. If you place them separate, then this ability impacts this area, this ability impacts this area. And you don't necessarily have to use the special ability side. You can also choose to use that side if you wanted. In this case, you probably wouldn't want to do that, but maybe you drew one of these that only had 1 and you wanted to have a higher number, like 3. Then you can do that, and you'll be ready to rock there. Now when you're placing your discs, you can do it in front of your deployment zone within medium range. There you go, right in there. Now you can place your discs out as long as they're within that range. In that range, they can stack on top of each other. That doesn't matter, just get them out there. You also have to have all of your heroes out right now. Before the game starts, all of your heroes should be out in your deployment zone. Anybody that you're not using, that's not deployed so far, those people get to go into a reserve pile to be brought into the game at a later time. Now, why on earth would you have extra units? That's a very good question. The reason for that is because in front of this deployment zone here, you can only place and have to place that many discs. So you cannot have less than that number, you cannot have more than that number in that deployment zone. So after you've placed your 3 in front of this and 3 in front of this, you will have extras, and that's what makes your reserve pile. Now if you're playing a 4-player game, there's a little tweak to the rule. Each player coming along to the edge here cannot place their deployment within medium range of the edge. So that would be this area, off limits for this side, and if you look at the other side, that would be this area off limits for them. So it creates a nice little square where nobody can start. Now if you're starting a 3-player game, the 2 across from each other, because you do have to sit across from each other whenever possible, So in a 2-player game, there and there. 3-player game, there, and either side. 4-player, you take up all the squares, all the sides. But again, in the 3-player game, 1 player in the middle, the squished player, gets to utilize the entire edge. And then the other players choose their side, and then can only build within long range of that side. And then long range of that side. After you have got all of that taken care of, you deal out 4 of these, what's the word I'm looking for, land cards, or hindering terrain cards, or just terrain cards. There you go, terrain cards. It doesn't matter how many players you've got, you're always going to use 4 of these. You just deal them out, then you reveal them, and again in reverse turn order, the cards are picked and placed as they're picked. So in a 3-player game, the lowest value, or the highest axe number, the 4, 3, 2, whatever the highest value is, gets to lay 2 of these in the long run. But not right at first. They pick 1, and then the next player picks 1, the next player picks 1, and what's left is for the 3rd player to decide to come back to. Now when placing your terrain, you can again place either side up that you'd like. As you can see, there's 2 sides. You can choose which side you want. You're playing them as you're drawing them. They cannot be within short range of the edge or within short range of another terrain piece. So if I place this piece here, for instance, I would not place another one within short range of said piece. Now, I wasn't very clear. It may seem like you've already got your units placed by now, but you don't. You just placed your deployment area, and then I kind of went over how to place your units. Now is the time that you're placing your units. And so, just refer back to that deployment section. Again, you have to have all your heroes out. They have to be in medium range, and you have to have that many units in front of each area. The turns will repeat in a loop. You essentially choose a command card, resolve the command card, discard the command card, and repeat the process until everything has an activation token or is pinned, any combination of that. So starting with choosing a command card. You look at your hand and you say, okay, I'm going to secretly choose this command card. You place it down on the table face down, wait for your opponent to do the same, or opponents. At the same time, you all reveal them, and then you move on to the resolve the command card. When you're resolving the command card, there is kind of a time frame in which they resolve. The bold cards resolve before the steady cards. The steady cards resolve before the devious cards, and the devious cards resolve before the bold cards. So there's kind of a circle going on where this is first before that, this is first before that, and this is first before that. And then there's the slow cards, and those just always go last. Now if there's ever a case of a tie, you go through initiative with the largest hammer getting to go first, and then going on with the other hammers in sequence. Also, if there's ever a situation in a 3 or 4 player game where one player plays each of these, as I already said, it kind of goes in a circle, so you would resolve that again with initiative. And so the person with the highest initiative gets to do theirs first, say he had steady, and then you just proceed from there and go in the regular order. Let's see. The way that you resolve these cards, some of them have an ability here. If the ability applies and you'd like to use it, you can, but you don't have to. Then there's a number up here. This number represents how many activations you can have for that card. So, an activation can be done one of several ways. You can move a disc. If you choose to move a disc, you look at the value right here in the arrow. That's the move value. So if this disc was right here, and I decided to activate it for movement, then I would go 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you know, it really doesn't have to go in a straight line. You could go 1, 2, 3, 4, however you want. You don't even have to move it all 4 if you don't want to. But after you've resolved the movement, you place one of the activation tokens on it, indicating it's been activated. It doesn't get to activate anymore until the round has completed, so everything's activated or pinned, like I said. So moving discs is one of your options. Resolving a focus ability is another option. So instead of moving a disc that has a focus ability, that's one of these abilities, may utilize that as its action. So if I utilize that ability, I would then place this on it. Would not get to move or anything like that. The next option is to resolve a ranged attack. A ranged attack will look like this, with a little play symbol. And the ranged attack will have the range that it goes from short, medium, long, or siege. Short, medium, and long will reference this. And then siege is anything outside of this that you can hit. Since we're going into range now, let's just kind of cover it. So the next portion here is the dice that you get to roll. Sometimes there's only 1, 3, or 2. And then after that is the damage and the type of damage. If this will focus. Okay, so damage, this does 3 damage. And it looks like it is magical damage because it has that symbol that looks kind of like a lightning bolt in there. The alternate type of damage is physical damage, and that looks like the axe in there. So this is a ranged attack that does physical damage. That's a ranged attack that does magic damage. So let's look at a ranged attack, just using those two guys. This guy had the medium range. So we measure from right here, and the medium range marker has to overlap in order for it to be considered. So yes, that is in range. If it was, for instance, here, it would be out of range, but it was here, so it's in range. So we resolve the attack as follows. You roll the dice, and then we have almost a perfect example here of what each dice is going to do. This does damage equal to the value of the damage. If you'll recall, this does 3 damage. So right there, we're going to put 3 damage on him. Then this means that the damage scatters. Now technically, you resolve the scatter before you resolve anything else. Any dice that comes up scatter, you determine what the nearest adjacent to your target is. Now this could be a friendly unit to you, or an enemy unit to you, or friendly to them. It doesn't matter. Whatever the closest unit is the one that the scatter affects. And if this unit is pinned, it's the unit that's pinned, that has pinned it, that is the closest target. If there are multiple units pinning it, then it would be the unit that is overlapping it the largest, that is the closest. So again, when you get the scatter, you roll that scatter dice, or the scatter dice, as many as you've scattered, and you hit that result. Which brings us to our next result, a miss. So the scatter did not do anything. Had it hit with this, a critical hit, or this skull, then it would have done the damage accordingly here. However, this does not do anything on a scatter, the chaos symbol, and if it's scattered again, it would not do anything on a scatter result. So we've gone over the scatter and the regular hit. The critical hit just does the amount of damage that the attack would normally do, plus if the unit does not have an activation counter on it, you put the activation counter on it. The miss is just a miss, and the chaos symbol allows you to perform a special ability if your unit has one in the flavor or the ability text here. This does not. I'm just showing you where it would be referenced if it was. So that's the way the range battle is resolved. If anything ever says that it does d6 damage, That's pretty obvious for anybody that plays a lot of games. If you're new to this whole thing, a d6 is just a six-sided dice. I think that's going to cover everything about range, with the exception of one other thing. Let's say that this unit was pinning that unit. You can still use a ranged attack on your target that you're pinning. So that's a pretty sneaky, pretty devious thing that the ranged units can do. We're going to talk more about pinning in just a second, but I want to cover siege range because there's one slight difference. As you'll recall, the siege range is anything outside of the range ruler. That's backwards, but you get the idea. When you're doing a sieged attack, this has no effect. Everything else is effective as normal, but the regular hit will not do any damage at all. It's just as though it was a miss. A pinned unit is a unit that you might have already gathered from before. It has another unit on top of it. A pinned unit cannot attack and cannot move, but if the pinned unit does have any of these special abilities indicated by that little crosshair, they can use those with an activation. But they can't attack and they can't move. And that brings to another point. If you recall back to the deployment phase, when you're deploying your units, if you were to deploy a unit pinned or stacked, then that unit would not be, the underneath unit would not be able to do anything until the unit above it moved off of it. So bear that in mind when you're setting up. And let's see, battles are all resolved same time. The way you're going to resolve a battle is utilizing the numbers that are right here. This 2, or the black circle, the white circle, and then this little starburst symbol. The way the battle works out is when a unit is pinned, the unit on top uses its black attack value to deal damage against that, and the unit on bottom uses its defensive or white value to deal damage to this guy. So in this case, he would deal 3 damage to him, and he will deal 2 damage to him simultaneously, which means this guy would be defeated, and this guy would gain 2 wound markers, just like so. Sometimes you will notice that some units have a shield right here. Basically what that means is if this unit ever gets to its health value, instead of killing it, you will place one of these wound markers on it. This guy can hold 1 wound marker, which means after he hits his health, you place a wound marker on it, and he has his 4 health again. After he hits his 4 health again, he is then removed. Some complicated rules with pinning, just to go in some more advanced theory here. If you've got 2 guys here that are pinned by 1, they only make 1 attack, so this guy has a decision to make. He's going to decide, is he going to attack this guy or this guy? And then whichever guy he's attacking, that battle resolves. And so that's a 3 and a 4. This guy would survive, this guy would wipe that guy out. Now this guy has taken 3 damage. Now this guy does his 3 against him and kills him. He does not get to do anything back because he already used his attack on that guy that got killed. And vice versa. If there's 2 guys pinning 1, he can only use his defense against the one that he chooses. And it goes that way. Now if you've got a big dog pile here, let's say there's a guy here, and a guy here, and here, and you can even do that as many other stacks as you'd like, but just for the sake of argument here, we're going to keep it at 3, just to give you the concept. So, and in fact, let's just, to help define the concept even clearer, let's do it like that. So it seems like this guy has both of them pinned, you would think, but that is not correct. This guy has this guy pinned, and this guy has this guy pinned. And the battle all resolves from top down. So this guy would then attack this guy and get his defense against him, and then this guy would attack this guy and get his defense against him. So I guess the attack defense rule doesn't really apply in this case because you're using your attack, or you're using your defense and then you're using your attack. A couple other little follow-ups you're going to want to know about these discs. Things that I'm not really going to go over here, but aside from any special abilities they have that use an action, they also have these dormant abilities. Like this one's a caster, which when you're looking at these cards, sometimes they'll say casters can do something. There's other classes that will be referenced here. Magic 2 has an ability, Resistant has an ability, resistant against that magic. So these abilities are kind of dormant. They don't really cost anything to use because they don't have the little crosshair symbol, if you'll recall, that crosshair symbol. Another thing you'll want to pay attention to is this is their race or their faction. Some cards will reference that. That's where you're going to look for that. That just means it's from the base set. One thing I forgot to mention on doing range is with the terrain. So this is a blocking terrain, which means if we were setting this up like that, this guy has a ranged attack. He can't see him because it goes through the hindering or blocking terrain. He can see him, however, because he is on the hindering terrain. He can see anything that's on the hindering terrain, whether it be here or bordering it or just even nicking it, but he cannot see through the hindering terrain. Line of sight is also tracked from any point of the disc to any point of the disc. So if this guy was like right here, as long as you could barely see any of it from any portion of this, you've got line of sight. It specifically says in the rules that the only thing that blocks line of sight is terrain that says it has the blocking feature, which is outlined in the cards and in the instruction book. But anyway, if a terrain has blocking, it blocks line of sight, as I indicated previously. That means this guy can freely hit this guy, even though it's going through either of these. You can go through your friendlies or through your opponents to get through to whatever you need without impacting them. So just thought that might be good to know, since it seems to be unique to this game. Everything else I've ever seen, other figures can block line of sight. So now a quick recap on how the turn works out. Now that you know what pinning is and how range and all that works out, first everyone chooses a command card, plays it face down, reveal at the same time. You play them in the order of the speed of the card, and in case of ties, obviously it always goes to the initiative order, referring to the axes that you've got. After everybody has resolved their card, the card gets discarded, and you check for a couple things. You see if anybody can move still, or if everybody's pinned and activated. If everybody's pinned and activated, then you resolve the battles with the pins, and then redraw whatever cards you've used. Another way that that phase can end is if everybody's out of cards, then at that time you do whatever's left on the field, whether there's people that can activate or not. Everyone's out of cards, you resolve the battles, redraw your hand, and continue until you've had 5 of those battle resolution phases. At the end of the 5 battle resolution phases, you refer back to your objective card and tally your objective points based on what your specific objective was for that round. And highest point value wins, with ties going to, you guessed it, this bad boy.